This is going to be fun, Mr. Peterson smirked, staring at James like a predator watching its prey. The entire classroom erupted in laughter as James Carter, the quietest student, stood frozen at the blackboard. Well? The teacher folded his arms. Or are we wasting our time? James swallowed hard. The equation in front of him looked impossible, intentionally designed to humiliate him. The students whispered, "He's going to crash so bad." "This is embarrassing," Mr. Peterson chuckled. "Come on, Carter, show us what you've got." James took a deep breath, gripping the chalk. The teacher thought this was a joke. He had no idea he had just challenged a genius. Laughter echoed through the classroom like a thunderstorm of humiliation. Mr. Peterson leaned against his desk, arms crossed, a smug grin stretching across his face as James Carter stood frozen in front of the board. "Well, Carter, I am waiting," Mr. Peterson taunted, his voice dripping with amusement. "Or are you trying to summon a math genie to solve it for you?" The class erupted into laughter again. James remained silent, gripping the marker tightly, his eyes scanning the monstrous equation written on the board. The numbers and symbols stretched across the surface like an impossible labyrinth. "Come on, kid. At least pretend to try," Mr. Peterson chuckled, shaking his head. "Or should I just call the janitor to wipe the board clean since we both know you will not be solving it?" More laughter. Some students whispered among themselves, "He is totally lost. Why did he even come up? This is painful to watch." I knew he was not smart, just quiet and weird. James ignored them all. His fingers tapped lightly against the marker, a subtle rhythm forming. He was not thinking about the teacher. He was not thinking about the laughter. He was breaking down the problem in his mind. Mr. Peterson sighed loudly, growing bored. "All right, Carter. I think we have seen enough. Why do you not take your seat before you embarrass yourself any further?" James exhaled slowly. "No," he said quietly. The entire class went silent. Mr. Peterson raised an eyebrow. "No?" James lifted the marker and, for the first time, pressed it to the board. The teacher rolled his eyes. "Oh, this should be good." James's hand moved. The first number appeared. Then another. Then symbols, lines, calculations. His movements were slow, deliberate, precise. The class watched, expecting nonsense. Mr. Peterson folded his arms. "Interesting approach, Carter. But let me save you some time. It is wrong." James kept writing. One student in the back frowned. "Wait, is that—" James wrote faster. His silent analysis was now becoming a full-speed calculation. The numbers aligned, the logic unfolded. The class, which had been mocking him just seconds ago, leaned forward in their seats. Mr. Peterson's smirk wavered. James's grip tightened around the marker. His mind moved like a supercomputer, breaking down the equation into simple steps, step after step, line after line. The class went from amused to confused. James was not lost. He was solving it. Mr. Peterson's smirk disappeared entirely. Something was wrong. Something was very, very wrong. Because James Carter was winning. A single stroke of chalk against the board, then another, and another. James Carter's hand moved with precision, the marker gliding smoothly as complex numbers and symbols appeared like a hidden language only he understood. The classroom, once filled with mocking laughter, fell eerily silent. Mr. Peterson's smirk froze in place, his arms still crossed as he watched the equation unfold. Something was wrong. James should have been struggling. He should have been hesitating, stuttering, making mistakes. He should have been failing. But instead, he was writing. Numbers, symbols, formulas, each movement calculated, each stroke deliberate. The students, who had been waiting to laugh, now exchanged confused glances. What is he doing?" one student whispered. Another leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "Wait, is he actually solving it?" James did not react. His eyes remained locked on the board, his expression calm, almost detached. His mind worked faster than his hand, processing the complex mathematical structure like a puzzle that had already been solved in his head. Every number, every fraction, every equation lined up with absolute precision. There was no hesitation, no second guessing, just pure, calculated logic. Mr. Peterson's eyes twitched. His confidence cracked. "All right, that is enough, Carter," he said, voice sharp, trying to regain control. James did not stop. Another line. Another perfect calculation. More numbers, more precision, more perfection. The laughter was gone. The whispers faded. The classroom, which had been a stage for James's humiliation, was now a silent witness to something unreal. A student gulped. "No way!" Another leaned back in their chair. "This is insane." James's hands moved faster, effortlessly reducing the impossible equation to a solvable form. Step by step, he dismantled the problem, working through calculations most of his classmates could not even begin to understand. Mr. Peterson cleared his throat, his authority slipping. "That equation. It is advanced collegiate-level mathematics. This is not a game." James did not stop. Step after step, line after line. The numbers arranged themselves with undeniable correctness. The teacher stepped closer, scanning for an error. Any error. There was none. The students watched, their expressions shifting from confusion to awe to something else. Fear. James was not guessing. James was solving it. Mr. Peterson swallowed, his throat dry. He felt something creeping in, something unfamiliar. Doubt. James, the boy he had humiliated for weeks, was rewriting reality in front of him. A student gasped. "Holy crap! He is actually doing it." Another whispered, voice shaking. How does he know this?" The chalk screeched as James reached the final step. Mr. Peterson's hands clenched into fists. The boy who was supposed to be the laughingstock had just become the most dangerous person in the room. The classroom was no longer filled with laughter. The air had changed, thick with tension, heavy with disbelief. James Carter's marker moved with quiet confidence, his hand steady as he effortlessly broke down the complex equation into simpler forms. Each stroke of the marker felt like a countdown, inching closer to something no one in the room expected. Step after step, number after number, each line perfectly aligned, each equation leading seamlessly into the next. The students no longer whispered jokes. Now they exchanged uneasy glances, their amusement long gone. This is unreal," a student mumbled under their breath. Another swallowed hard. "He is not even hesitating." James's mind worked at a speed beyond their comprehension. He was not second-guessing himself, not stopping to think. He already knew the answer before he even wrote it. His confidence was unnatural, almost mechanical. At the front of the room, Mr. Peterson's smug expression had been replaced with something else. His eyes darted between the board and James, scanning for mistakes, waiting for an error, anything that could disprove what was happening in front of him. But there were no mistakes. James's solution was flawless. Step by step, he dismantled the seemingly impossible equation, reducing it to something digestible, something even a seasoned mathematician would struggle to process in real time. Mr. Peterson's mouth twitched. His hands, once confidently crossed over his chest, slowly dropped to his sides. This was not supposed to happen. This cannot be right," he muttered, half to himself. James said nothing. Another number, another equation, another flawless step. The tension in the room thickened, suffocating the remaining skepticism. One student leaned forward, their eyes darting between James and the board. "He is actually about to finish it." Another shook their head. "No way. No freaking way." Mr. Peterson took an involuntary step forward. "Carter." But he stopped himself. He could feel it now, the weight of this moment. James was not struggling. James was not even trying. James was simply demonstrating. The realization sent a chill down the teacher's spine. This was not a lucky guess, not a memorized formula. This was genius. James's marker slowed, approaching the final step. His classmates held their breath. Some gripped the edges of their desks. Even the ones who had mocked him the loudest now sat frozen, their eyes wide, their faces pale. One final stroke. One last number. James paused, taking a brief moment before writing the last part of his solution. The tension was unbearable. Every eye was on him. And then, with a single, steady movement, James completed the equation. He placed the marker down, turned around, and looked directly at Mr. Peterson. For the first time, it was the teacher who was speechless. James stepped back from the board, placing the marker down with the same calmness he had maintained throughout. The classroom was dead silent. Not a single giggle, not a single whisper. All eyes were glued to the board, staring at the equation he had just completed. Flawlessly. Mr. Peterson's face had gone pale. His arms hung limply by his sides. His eyes flickered between the answer and James, his brain refusing to process what had just happened. The tension was suffocating. James crossed his arms and waited. For once, it was not him being tested. It was them. A student finally broke the silence. "Wait. That's correct?" The words came out in disbelief. Another student leaned forward, eyes wide. "No way. He actually solved it?" The class erupted into hushed whispers. Some students fumbled with their notebooks, checking their own calculations. Others simply gawked at the board, unable to believe what they were seeing. Mr. Peterson inhaled sharply, his fingers twitching at his sides. His mouth opened, then closed. This was impossible. A mistake. It had to be a mistake. He grabbed a calculator from his desk, his hands slightly unsteady, and began punching in the numbers. The room watched as he checked, rechecked, and then checked again. The color drained further from his face. A student in the back chuckled nervously. "Oh man, he's freaking out." Another one whispered, "If James got this right, that means—" The realization spread through the class like wildfire. Mr. Peterson, the arrogant, all-knowing math teacher, had just been completely outmatched by a student he thought was an easy target. James finally broke the silence. "Is there a problem, sir?" His voice was steady, cool, unshaken. The class held their breath. Mr. Peterson's hands curled into fists. He wanted to deny it, to find a flaw, to call James a cheat. But there was nothing. No mistakes, no miscalculations, just perfection. James Carter had solved a problem so difficult that even the smartest students would not have dared to attempt it. A quiet, unassuming boy, the same one who had been mocked minutes ago, had just single-handedly shattered the illusion of Mr. Peterson's authority. The teacher swallowed hard, forcing himself to speak. How? His voice cracked slightly. James met his gaze, unbothered. "Math is easy when you actually understand it." The students erupted. Laughter, cheers, gasps. The teacher, the one who had humiliated so many students, had just been taken down in his own arena. Mr. Peterson's fingers trembled as he placed the calculator back on the desk. For the first time in his career, he had no response. James picked up his backpack and walked back to his seat, cool and composed. The class stared at him, their expressions a mix of admiration and shock. And Mr. Peterson? He could only stand there, humiliated, in front of the entire room. A heavy silence filled the room. Then, one snicker. Another. And then, like a dam breaking, the entire class burst into hushed laughter and murmurs. "He really got it right," one student muttered. "Mr. Peterson got destroyed," another whispered. "Dude, James just made history in this classroom." James sat back down, unfazed by the growing commotion. He did not bask in the attention. He did not smirk. He simply opened his notebook, as if nothing had happened. But for the rest of the students, something monumental had shifted. For months, years, Mr. Peterson had ruled the classroom with arrogance. He had mocked, humiliated, and crushed the confidence of students who struggled with math. And now he was the one standing frozen, his authority in shambles. A student in the front row leaned forward, a grin spreading across his face. "So, sir, were you going to explain the problem, or should we let James take over?" The class erupted. A few students pounded on their desks, laughing. Some high-fived each other. One even wiped fake tears from his eyes, mimicking Mr. Peterson's shocked expression. Mr. Peterson's jaw clenched, his grip on the desk tightened. "Enough!" His voice cracked slightly, but he tried to regain control. "This is still my classroom." The laughter only got louder. One girl shook her head. "Not anymore, sir." Mr. Peterson's face turned red. He was losing them. The entire class. He needed to reassert dominance, to remind them who was in charge. He turned back to James, forcing a smirk. "Clever trick, Carter. But one equation does not make you a genius." James barely looked up from his notebook. "I never said I was." That simple sentence carried more weight than any insult. James had nothing to prove. Mr. Peterson, however, did. A student near the window called out, "Hey, Mr. Peterson, why don't you give us another equation? Maybe one you can solve?" The class howled. Mr. Peterson's lips pressed into a thin line. His authority was slipping through his fingers like sand. He needed to shut this down, fast. He pointed at James. "Just because you got one answer correct does not mean—" James calmly turned his notebook toward him. An entire page filled with complex equations, solved perfectly. Mr. Peterson's mouth snapped shut. A gasp rippled through the students. The genius was real. One student whistled. "Yeah, I think we all know who the real teacher is now." The class roared with approval. Mr. Peterson took a slow, deep breath, swallowing his pride. This was a battle he had lost. And James? He simply turned back to his notebook, unfazed, because for him, winning had never been the goal. But proving the teacher wrong? That was just an added bonus. The classroom buzzed with energy, students whispering and chuckling as Mr. Peterson stood frozen in front of the board. His face, once smug and full of authority, now reflected nothing but disbelief and panic. Then, the door swung open. Principal Reynolds stepped inside, brow furrowed. "What is going on here?" Silence fell for a split second. Then, one student in the back shot up from his seat. "Sir, James solved it!" The impossible equation! Reynolds blinked, his gaze shifting between the student and the chalkboard, where the once daunting equation now stood completed. Flawless. The principal's eyes widened. "Wait! This!" He turned to Mr. Peterson. "You assigned this problem?" The teacher cleared his throat, desperately searching for a way out. "It was just an exercise," he muttered, forcing a strained chuckle. "Nothing more than a classroom challenge." But another student cut in. "No, sir. He set James up to fail. He thought it was impossible." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the class. Mr. Peterson stiffened. "That is not true." James, still calm as ever, picked up his notebook. Without a word, he stood, walked past his flustered teacher, and handed it directly to Principal Reynolds. Reynolds skimmed through the neatly written equations, his eyes darting from line to line. His lips parted slightly, his expression shifting from confusion to shock. "You solved all of these?" he asked James, holding up the pages. James nodded once. "Yes, sir, step by step." The students leaned in, barely containing their excitement. Reynolds turned back to Mr. Peterson, eyes narrowing. "And you doubted this student?" Mr. Peterson swallowed hard. "Well, I was just testing his ability." "Testing?" Reynolds cut him off. "Or humiliating." The room fell dead silent. Beads of sweat formed on Mr. Peterson's forehead. "Principal Reynolds, I assure you—" Reynolds raised a hand. "Enough." He turned to James. "Carter, where did you learn to do this?" James hesitated, then shrugged. "I just like numbers." A few students grinned. Others whispered, impressed beyond words. Principal Reynolds exhaled, shaking his head. "Mr. Peterson, I hope this is not how you usually handle your classroom." Mr. Peterson's mouth opened. No words came out. The students could see it, his downfall. The teacher who prided himself on belittling students had just been destroyed by one. Principal Reynolds handed the notebook back to James and gave him a firm nod. "Impressive work, young man. Truly." James simply took the notebook and returned to his seat, unfazed. Reynolds then faced the class. If anyone deserved humiliation today, it certainly was not Mr. Carter. His gaze landed on Peterson. "We will discuss this later." A few students covered their mouths to hide their grins. As the principal walked out, all eyes shifted to the teacher. Mr. Peterson? He looked like he wanted to disappear. And James? He had already moved on. The tension in the room was suffocating. Mr. Peterson stood frozen at his desk, his usual smirk nowhere to be seen. Students whispered among themselves, barely containing their excitement. Principal Reynolds didn't leave the room. Instead, he slowly walked to the front of the class, turning to face Mr. Peterson with an expression that was unreadable, but heavy with disappointment. "Mr. Peterson," he said, his voice calm but firm, "I have received multiple complaints about your teaching methods over the years, complaints about humiliating students." A ripple of murmurs spread through the class. Some students exchanged knowing looks. Others smirked, as if finally feeling vindicated. Mr. Peterson paled. "Sir, I only push my students to do better," he stammered. Reynolds raised an eyebrow. "Pushing them? Or tearing them down?" He gestured toward James. "Because what I just witnessed was a teacher setting up a student to fail, and enjoying it." The students nodded in agreement. "You do this every year," one girl blurted out. "Every time a quiet kid speaks up, you try to make them look stupid." "Yeah," another student added. "You tell us we're failures if we don't get it right in one try." Mr. Peterson's face turned red. James, meanwhile, sat completely still. No gloating, no smirking, just watching. Principal Reynolds sighed. "James," he said, turning to him, "you solved an equation that most adults would struggle with. But more importantly, you handled this situation with grace, which is more than I can say for your teacher." The entire class turned toward James. James simply shrugged. "I did not come here to embarrass anyone," he said, his tone even. "I just did what I was asked." The humility in his voice made the students respect him even more. But Principal Reynolds wasn't done. He pulled out his phone, tapping a few buttons. Then, he turned the screen toward Mr. Peterson. "Do you recognize these?" he asked. Mr. Peterson blinked. The screen displayed emails, complaints from past students, notes from parents, even warnings from staff. Every single one detailed his cruel and belittling behavior. "This is what we call a pattern," Reynolds continued. "And today? Today, you got caught." The students sat in stunned silence. Mr. Peterson opened his mouth, then closed it. He had nothing left to say. Reynolds exhaled. "I think it is time for a serious discussion about your future at this school." Gasps filled the room. James, still composed, simply picked up his notebook and closed it. A student whispered, "This is so much better than math class." Another muttered, "I never thought I'd see Peterson lose." For the first time since stepping into this classroom, Mr. Peterson didn't look in control. He looked like a man whose power had just been stripped away. And James? He had not needed to say a single cruel word to do it. A heavy silence filled the room. Mr. Peterson stood there, shoulders stiff, eyes locked on the floor. For the first time, he had no sarcastic remark, no smug comeback, just the weight of his own downfall pressing on him. The students were still stunned, whispering in hushed voices. Some exchanged glances, others sat wide-eyed, still processing what had just happened. Then, James stood up. The classroom froze. For so long, he had been the quiet one, the student no one paid attention to. But now, every single person was waiting to hear what he had to say. He looked around the room, at the students who had laughed at him, at the teacher who had tried to break him, and finally, at Principal Reynolds, who was watching with interest. Then, James spoke. "Mocking people does not make you smarter." His voice was steady, strong, and filled with meaning. "Humiliating students does not make you a better teacher." A few students swallowed hard. Some looked down, ashamed. Even the ones who had laughed earlier seemed to shrink in their seats. James wasn't just talking to Mr. Peterson. He was talking to everyone. A real teacher helps their students rise. They don't push them down just to feel taller. Silence. Absolute silence. Mr. Peterson's jaw tightened, but he still did not speak. Principal Reynolds nodded slowly, impressed. He turned to the class. "James is right," he said. "And I want every student here to know you deserve respect, from your teachers, from your classmates, and from yourself." The students nodded, some looking genuinely moved. Then Reynolds turned back to Mr. Peterson. His voice was firm. "We will be having a very serious discussion about your teaching methods, Mr. Peterson. In the meantime, you are dismissed for the day." Gasps rippled through the room. Mr. Peterson clenched his fists, his pride shattered. But he could do nothing. Without another word, he grabbed his papers, turned stiffly, and walked out of the classroom. The moment the door closed behind him, the students erupted. "Did that just happen? Bro, James just ended Peterson's career. This was the best day of school ever." James simply sat back down, calm as ever. Chris, a classmate who had laughed at him earlier, turned to James. "Dude, you're a genius. Why didn't you ever tell us?" James smirked. "You never asked." Laughter filled the room, not the cruel kind, but genuine admiration. Principal Reynolds smiled. "James, I think it is time we have a conversation about some advanced placement opportunities for you." James nodded. "I would like that." As the students buzzed with excitement, James glanced at the empty teacher's desk. For the first time ever, he had been the one teaching the lesson. News of what happened in that classroom spread fast. By lunchtime, the entire school was buzzing with whispers and retellings of the moment James Carter destroyed Mr. Peterson. By the next day, it had spread beyond the school. Students posted about it online. Quiet kid humiliates teacher with insane math skills. Math teacher tries to mock a student, gets completely owned. Genius teen shuts down arrogant teacher in the best way possible. The video someone had recorded in class went viral overnight. Thousands of views, thousands of comments. James Carter was no longer just the quiet kid in the back of the class. He was a legend. James walked through the halls with his head held high. No more whispers behind his back. No more classmates doubting him. No more cruel stares from Mr. Peterson. Instead, students stepped aside when he walked by. Some gave him nods of respect. Others whispered excitedly as he passed. For the first time, James wasn't invisible. Chris caught up to him at his locker. "Dude, you broke Peterson, like, actually destroyed him." James smirked. "I did not destroy him. I just educated him." Chris laughed. "Yeah, whatever you say, Einstein." Meanwhile, in Principal Reynolds' office, changes were being made. The principal had called a meeting with the school board. Mr. Peterson's behavior had been documented, and he was now under strict review. And a new rule was being enforced in the school. No more teachers humiliating students. No more toxic power trips. A fair, respectful learning environment for everyone. James's quiet rebellion had sparked a real change. As James walked out of the school that day, he felt something new. Pride. Not just in himself, but in the fact that he stood up for something bigger than just a math problem. Mr. Peterson? He was nowhere to be seen. He had taken a leave of absence, unable to face the humiliation of losing control in his own classroom. And even if he came back, he would never forget this day. He would never forget James Carter. Because legends are never forgotten.